What is the story of One Piece about? Well, I think at this point we all understand that it's about a lot more than a boy trying to find a famous treasure. In fact, I think the story has now become so dense with characters and plot lines and themes that to comprehensively explain what the entire narrative of One Piece is really about would take multiple videos. So let's say this is the first one. I want to start with breaking down one of the fundamental ideas the series is built on, as the first step to reframe the story of One Piece. So about 800 chapters into the story, we get a game-changing quote. "I am Nekomamushi, the one who waits for the dawn of the world." Before getting into that quote, let's start with the basics. Now we all know the basic formula of One Piece. The Straw Hats sail to a new island has bad guys that are causing problems, Straw Hats beat the bad guys and solve the problems. Move on to the next island, rinse, repeat. But while this formula is, on the surface, fairly straightforward, I think what people tend to overlook is the actual idea Oda is trying to communicate each time we see this pattern. What are we repeatedly being shown about the One Piece world? Well, to start with, most people who never actually give the series a try tend to have the impression that One Piece is a very light-hearted adventure series, and it definitely seems that way when we first start reading it as well. So much about the One Piece world can be characterized as charming, or zany, or silly. It seems like a genuinely fun universe to explore. However, what we consistently see is that this world is never as happy as it tends to seem on the surface. In each location the Straw Hats visit, there is some great evil the land is suffering from. There is almost always an oppressive ruling power, or an internal conflict on the verge of creating an oppressive ruling power. But the constant is that there is a deep darkness that plagues each island. A village where humans have become the subservient race. A nation where medicine is withheld from its people. A country being manipulated into civil war. A land where everyone is at the mercy of an all-powerful god. The idea is that in all corners of the world, there is this darkness that has taken hold. And not only that, but the Straw Hats will often reach a given island at a crucial juncture, at a point when the darkness has become absolutely overwhelming. Maybe the nation is falling apart, maybe mass genocide is about to occur, maybe a chance for a better future has been destroyed, but the point is a level of absolute hopelessness has been reached. A point where the citizens of each land have fought as hard as they can, have struggled as much as they can, have done everything in their power to stop this evil, and ultimately found themselves helpless. At this point, when things have become worse than ever, when the citizens are literally praying for some sort of a miracle, when they're completely devoid of all hope, that's when the Straw Hats become the hope. Now, they never plan to become the hope, they never choose to be heroes, but simply by becoming invested in the struggles of their friends, they end up fighting the battles that the suffering people of each land can't hope to fight themselves. They're the ones who the weak can pin their hopes on. They're the miracle workers who can do the impossible. As such, what the Straw Hats are meant to symbolize is the light. This is the imagery Oda consistently pushes throughout the series, that the Straw Hats are these shining stars of hope wherever they go. Essentially, in all corners of this world, there is darkness and despair, yet there is this ship that sails from land to land, bringing the light to shine through the darkness wherever it goes. So yes, there is a repetitive formula, but it's repetitive for a reason. Oda is constantly building on the idea that this is a seemingly bright world with dark shadows, and the Straw Hats will always be the light sailing through this world of hardship and tragedy, erasing those shadows. By maintaining this as a basic, fundamental idea underlying the entire narrative, it serves as a foundational concept for him to build towards a larger idea behind the story. So in every island there is some sort of darkness that the Straw Hats have to vanquish, but we know at this point that the One Piece story is much more than a bunch of disconnected island-based adventures. Even as the Straw Hats are able to bring light from isolated land to isolated land, we gradually begin to understand that there is a greater, all-encompassing darkness at work here. At first, we are meant to believe that the primary terror of the seas is pirates. After all, this is the great age of pirates, this is a story about pirates, and while Luffy and his crew are good people, almost every other pirate they encounter is a villain through and through, which is why Luffy spends much of the first part of his journey saving innocent people from wicked pirates. Seems like a simple enough good guy, bad guy setup, but really shouldn't this be the Marines' job? Shouldn't this be what the government is taking care of? After all, the people of this world rely on the Marines to protect them, and they seem to have great faith in the world government that rules them. Yet, as the story progresses, we start getting drips of information, small hints that build on top of each other that there is something more fundamentally wrong with this world. The Marines that people trust seem to freely abuse their power, and even enable the actions of pirates, to the point that the greater world government behind the Marines has gone so far as to employ pirates themselves to supposedly maintain order. It's this very Shichibukai system that led to Arlong being released into East Blue, and almost caused the destruction of the entire nation of Alabasta. That incident was only prevented thanks to the work of pirates, but then we learned that the world government has chosen to cover up this fact and suppress the truth. Not only that, the government's main concern after the incident is literally deciding which pirate to hire next. It starts to become clear that this organization is more concerned with protecting its image and maintaining power than ruling properly. So gradually we keep getting hints of what this grander authority is really like until finally we reach Water 7, and the narrative takes a sharp turn directly into the heart of the matter. Oda essentially pulls back the curtain and reveals the true nature of this government that rules the world. We see it for the authoritarian empire it really is, one that uses manipulation, violence, and suppression of the truth to maintain its power as this oppressive regime that stretches across the globe, a regime that has held control over this world for literally 800 years. And so, if we backtrack for a moment, what we've seen so far is that each island the Straw Hats visit is plagued by some sort of darkness. The Straw Hats fight on behalf of their friends and become the light that vanquishes this darkness, and then they move on. That is until they meet Robin, who is an odd case because she is supposedly burdened by a mysterious greater darkness. She has a foe that is supposedly so great that she cannot shake it no matter where she goes. And through her, our eyes are finally open to the fact that this greater darkness is the world itself. That's what the world government is meant to symbolize. The world government is the greater darkness that casts a shadow over everything we've seen so far. Those who serve it are literally the agents of darkness, who carry out its dark justice. From this reveal onwards, Oda cuts away all pretense and makes it clearer and clearer what the true root evil of the world is. As bad as pirates are, the oppressive dark regime that gave rise to these rebellious criminals is even worse. The government is the true overarching darkness of this world, and we see this idea communicated more and more blatantly from Sabaody onwards in nearly every following arc. So look again at the small-scale, arc-to-arc story structure of One Piece, where the Straw Hats often reach a new island, think it's amazing, slowly get hints that something is wrong, and then ultimately realize that there is a far greater darkness at work. So too did Oda structure the broader narrative of One Piece in exactly the same way. We start by setting off on a fun adventure into a world that appears dreamlike and fantastic on the surface. We slowly get hints that the world is not as romantic as it seems, that there is evil everywhere and that much of the evil we see can be traced back to a greater source, until finally we get hit with the realization that we've been reading a work of dystopian fiction this entire time. So by the end of the first half of the series, we are made to understand that there is this great darkness that covers the world. Now that this has been firmly established and we transition into the second half of the series, Oda begins placing greater emphasis on certain themes that have always been present, but are starting to take greater meaning. In particular, starting in Fishman Island, he really began pushing the significance of the sun. We learned that Otohimi's dream was for the fishmen, who have been forced to live in the dark depths of the ocean floor for centuries, to one day be able to reach the light of the sun. Now, of course, here the goal of reaching the sun is both literal and metaphorical. The fishmen literally want to reach the sun since they live at the bottom of the ocean, but through them, Oda is able to start pushing the figurative concept that the sun in this series symbolizes a better world and a brighter future. We see this idea echoed by another race, the Giants of Elbaf, who actually seem to worship the sun. Interestingly, Oda chooses to set the brief flashback of Elbaf during the winter solstice, a festival specifically celebrating the death and rebirth of the sun. And here we get the imagery of a harsh winter giving way to the return of a bright sun. And even just recently, we've been reading about the tragic state of Wano, a nation that has fallen into darkness ever since Kaido and Orochi took power. Again, we hear of a prophecy where Lady Toki characterizes the oppressive ruler Orochi as the moon, and declares that one day he will meet his demise when he is met with the radiance of the dawn. So basically, a lot of emphasis throughout the second half of the story on the emergence of the sun, or essentially the idea of the dawn. Now obviously Oda is not talking about defeating the world government each time the idea of the sun or the dawn is brought up, but the point is that as we approach the end of the series, he's been generally referencing the dawn more and more. It's become a constant in his language across various contexts, and always with the connotation of the end of darkness and a brighter future. That's the important takeaway, because that is the broader concept of what this story is ultimately heading towards, the dawn of this entire world. When the Minks first started mentioning the dawn of this world, we had no idea what they were referring to. We just started to gradually realize that it was of extreme importance to them to see this dawn, to the point that they've devoted their entire lives to reaching it. Now, considering the name of Pedro's crew, the Nox Pirates, it seems that from the Minks' perspective, the world has been in some sort of never-ending night. However, they name themselves after the night because they believe that no night can continue forever without a dawn. Naturally, it would seem the night they're referring to, the greater darkness, as I've already explained, is the world government's rule. This is heavily implied by the fact that they say this night has supposedly been going on for centuries, just like the world government's rule. And in Pedro's efforts towards reaching the new dawn, he was specifically searching for poneglyphs that hold the secrets of the world prior to the world government's takeover. So to recap, since the time skip, Oda has been repeatedly weaving in the idea that a bright future is represented by the sun, harsh winters end with the rebirth of the sun, that the moon will always ultimately meet the radiance of the morning, etc., etc., point being that through all darkness there will eventually come a dawn. And through the Minks, Oda has communicated to us that, in fact, the entire world is waiting for its dawn, a liberation from the long night of darkness that the world government's rule represents. Now interestingly, often when the sun is brought up, characters also seem to specifically associate the greatness of the sun with the vast, unbound openness of the sky, essentially the sense of freedom the sun invokes. Since we all know how important freedom is in One Piece, this suggests that the sun is not only meant to represent a brighter future, but more specifically the idea that a brighter future is inherently characterized by freedom. We can see this idea foreshadowed all the way back in Amazon Lily. There we learn that all the slaves of the world nobles are branded with the hoof of the soaring dragon on their back. This is the mark of the celestial dragons. It is the symbol of their control. However, in one of the coolest bits of symbolism in the entire series, when Fisher Tiger frees the slaves from the celestial dragon's control, he rebrands them, such that the symbol of their slavery is literally wiped away by the sun. From then on, the sun is the fisherman's symbol of freedom and their refusal to be controlled. All things considered, it seems only natural that Oda would give the sun this additional meaning of freedom. After all, the main darkness of the One Piece world, the world government, is largely defined by how much it seeks to suppress freedom. So it's only fitting that the sun not only represents the end of the dark regime, but also the freedom that this would bring. And for now, I'll save more talk about freedom for some future video. Now lastly, Oda also seems to be saying that in order for there to be a dawn, there first needs to be a complete reset of the existing order. The slate needs to be wiped clean. Going back to Fishman Island, really two main ideas were communicated. First, that fishmen need to strive to reach the light of the sun, and second, that in order to reach this light, their entire history needs to be torn down, so they may free themselves of their darkness and begin again from scratch. We've seen this idea before in One Piece. Dalton also wanted to tear down Drum Kingdom and eradicate its history, so they may begin again from scratch, and as such they are reborn as a brand new country without a name. Similarly, we later see at the end of Dressrosa, after the entire country is decimated and completely reduced to rubble, that this nation in ruins is actually rejoicing, as even through the destruction they may now also be born again, as a new land of freedom. As such, taking a step back and piecing together all these ideas that Oda has been gradually building up through various arcs and contexts, it seems he is saying that the world is in a great darkness, that the sun and the dawn signify the end of darkness, that in order to reach the sun, everything that existed must be completely torn down and reset to zero, that when everything is destroyed and set to zero, then only from that blank slate may the dawn rise on a new world with a bright future. Which brings us full circle to the idea that the sun also symbolizes freedom, as that is the type of future that is most desired. This is likely why the goal of the D tribe is said to be the destruction of the world. So we've established that the dawn of the world needs to happen, to end the long night of the world government's rule. But of course this can't just magically happen, someone or ones need to actually make this happen, and of course this is where the Straw Hats come in. Looking back through the series, we can see they've been being built up from the start to be the ones who will change the world. We've heard multiple times that there is a man Roger has been waiting for, someone who can accomplish what Roger could not, due to his life being cut short by disease. And it seems that Roger's crew have come to believe that Luffy and the Straw Hats will be the ones to take up this task. Whitebeard, in arguably the most important speech in the story, told us that one day a man will come bearing the centuries of history on his shoulders, and will challenge the world government to a fight. Otohime spoke of a figure who would be able to guide Poseidon down the right path, and would ultimately bring about a great change in the world. And so really, this whole story we've been building towards the Straw Hats taking up this role that the Minks have been talking about, of being the ones who will bring the dawn of the world. Even beyond just speeches and prophecies, Oda has been dropping bits of foreshadowing throughout the story from the start. I've already talked about how the Straw Hats are consistently characterized as a light of hope wherever they go, but now we can go back through the series with a fresh perspective and see that there were hints all along that the Straw Hats are not just the light, they're specifically the light of the sun, or the dawn. Luffy's adventure begins with him setting off from Dawn Island. In Thriller Bark, Oda creates a setup where the entire arc the Straw Hats are literally fighting for the dawn, and Moria's defeat and the end of the shadow hanging over Thriller Bark coincides with the arrival of the dawn. In Skypiea, an arc really heavy with foreshadowing, well, follow me here for a moment, there is a false god who finds that Luffy is his natural enemy, just as the D tribe is the natural enemy of the false gods, the celestial dragons. We see this false god beginning a great cleansing, similar to what the celestial dragons are currently contemplating. We see that in the moment before this great cleansing happens, when all hope seems lost, when the sky has turned black and darkness has completely taken over, Luffy, the natural enemy of God, is able to destroy God's darkness and bring out the sun. And lastly, Oda tends to make pirate ships reflect the nature of the captain and crew themselves. I think a lot of readers don't think much about why the Straw Hats ship has the design and the name it does, but I hope that after watching this far through the video, we're all on the same page, and you can see how deliberate of a choice the Thousand Sunny was. The way Oda made the sun their ship's figurehead is pretty clever, honestly, as he made it seem like an almost random choice. It wouldn't make much sense for Franky to make the figurehead be the sun since the Straw Hats aren't really aware of the symbolism this carries. Instead, Oda just had Franky make the figurehead be a lion, since naturally Franky would think that's a manly figurehead. Franky just kind of botches the design so that it just so happens to look like a sun instead, giving a good reason for the ship to be named the Thousand Sunny, without the Straw Hats or the reader truly realizing the significance yet. Most importantly, consider the timing of the Straw Hats changing ships. For the first half of their journey, the Straw Hats are simply exploring the world, defeating darkness wherever they happen to encounter it. Then finally they come up against the greater darkness that covers the entire world, the world government, and they declare war against it. From that moment on, the story fundamentally changes, the real story of One Piece begins. And so after declaring war against the darkness that covers the world, the Straw Hats now need a new ship that reflects their ultimate role, the sun. Even though they're oblivious to all this themselves, from now on they're on a path to bring the dawn of the world. As Iceberg says, the Sunny seems just right for them, a ship that crosses thousands of cruel seas as cheerful as the sun. And as I said at the start of the video, that is essentially what the Straw Hats have been doing so far. In all corners of the world there is darkness, and the Straw Hats travel through the cruel seas as a light of hope, going from land to land and ending darkness wherever they encounter it. And as I also said at the start of the video, Oda structures his story so that the small-scale story structure is representative of the large-scale story structure. So basically we're now at a point where we are realizing that the real overarching story of One Piece is about the Straw Hats doing what they have always been doing on the small scale, bringing light wherever they go, on a global scale, to bring light to the entire world. What I especially like about all this is that the Straw Hats' personal mission never changes. They never consider themselves heroes who go around bringing light wherever they go. Even when it comes to bringing the dawn of the world, this just seems to be set up as the natural endpoint of Luffy's own personal goal to find the One Piece, as it is implied by Whitebeard that finding the One Piece will in itself result in the great change in the world. That's likely why Roger sent people after One Piece in the first place. He was unable to bring the dawn of the world, but he could bring the dawn of an era that would lead to the dawn of the world, which is why the description of his execution seems to have such specific imagery. With the fading spark of his life, Roger set the whole world ablaze. And based on how Oda has presented his ideas so far, it seems like the dawn naturally comes after setting everything back to zero, which is in line with what the Straw Hats already tend to do wherever they go. They don't have to be heroes, but they're perfectly happy tearing stuff down. So maybe at this point, some of you might be shrugging your shoulders and basically saying, so what? At the core of it, isn't the dawn of the world basically just a good versus evil story? And it's true, I'm not talking about a particularly philosophically complex theme here, but great storytelling isn't defined so much by what theme you are choosing to write about, but more so how it is written in. And I hope at this point in the video you can agree that how Oda has slowly, methodically built up the idea of the dawn in the story is nothing short of brilliant. And keep in mind that obviously the dawn isn't the only major theme of One Piece, I'm only talking about a small chunk of what the greater story is really about. There are a lot more themes just as significant as this that have been just as masterfully developed, which will make for future videos. But thinking just about the theme of the dawn, just take a step back to consider just how drastically different the story has become from what our concept of the story was on day one, while at the same time the story still somehow stays entirely true to our concept of the story from day one. When One Piece begins, it seems we're reading the story of a boy on an adventure to find a treasure. In actuality, the story is about a dystopic world that has been held by a great darkness for hundreds of years. Many wills and prophecies have been passed down through the centuries about a man who will one day end this long night and bring the world into its dawn. So really, we are reading the legend of that man. A man who does set out with the simple goal of finding a treasure, but who turns into a practically messianic figure, traveling from land to land, acting as a savior without ever actually intending to, bringing light wherever he goes. And as he continues pursuing his own goal, his journey to find the treasure he is looking for will naturally bring him up against the greater darkness that has held the entire world for so long, so that he may finally defeat it and bring light not just to one land, not just to Alabasta, not just Drum Kingdom, not just Fishman Island, not just Skypiea, not just Dressrosa, but to the entire world. And again, to really understand that the real story is both completely different from what it was on day one, and yet somehow exactly the same, consider the title of the first chapter, Romance Dawn. Taken at face value, it has a simple, straightforward meaning that accurately represents what we think the story is initially about. This is the start, or the dawn, of Luffy's romantic adventure. But we slowly find this world is not as romantic as it initially seemed. In fact, it's a dystopia. So really what the entire story is leading towards is the dawn of a new world, an idealized dream world of boundless freedom, essentially a true world of romance. The dawn of a young boy's romantic adventure turns into a 1,000-chapter epic that will culminate in the dawn of a romantic world. To me, this simple chapter title speaks volumes about Oda as a writer. It's a title that is in itself proof of a clear, decisive vision for what this massive epic was always set to be about. An epic that has stayed the course on the decades-long journey so far and has never lost sight of what it was meant to be from day one. If you enjoyed this video, then please like, share, and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter for updates on future videos, and you can support me on Patreon to help me make more videos. Benefits include access to an hour-long podcast released every other week. Lastly, big shout out to YouTuber Ohara for the thumbnail, check out his channel in the description below, and big shout out to all my patrons, especially Mikalawa, Crimson Crystal, Joaquim Tornies, Lorenzo Linares, Ankazar, Sebastian C., Simon Fines, Rob Williams, Wiase, Luis Aguirre, Dark Eternal, Isaac Granados, The Rester, Laura, Knocklucci, Vince T, Geoff Nettlekoff, Rohanite, Paul, Spike SP, Jacob Marn, Schwalbe, Patrick Olund, Patron, Mark S, Lun, Benji Makoto, Michelle Dreyer, and Cliver Mort.